This is the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast with your hosts Chris Spear and Andrew Wilkinson. Each week, we'll be speaking with food entrepreneurs and people in the culinary industry. If you're interested in learning more about our organization dedicated to helping people build and grow their food businesses, look us up on the web at chefswithoutrestaurants.com and .org and on Facebook and Instagram at Chefs Without Restaurants. Now, enjoy the show. So this is Chris again, and I'm doing another episode without Andrew. So this week I have my good friend Anthony with me. Anthony is a little different than most of our guests. He is not a professional chef, and he does not work in the food service business. But he is what I would call a very serious home cook. His hobbies include pasta making, charcuterie, fermentation, and gardening. Last year, he and I actually did a collaborative pop-up dinner in Washington, D.C. that was focused on homemade pasta and Italian food. We did 8 courses together, 4 of which were homemade pastas. So you don't have to be working in a professional kitchen setting to be an awesome chef. So I had him come on talking a little bit about being a serious home cook, some of the things you could do, some of his favorite resources. As I mentioned, pasta is one of his favorites, so he gives a lot of tips on practical pasta making, and I'm dropping a lot of his favorite resources in the show notes. So check those out. You can find him on Instagram at TonyDig, TonyDig, and definitely hit him up if you have any questions about any of those things. I hope you have a great week. I know we all have a lot going on right now, but please hit me up if there's anything that I can do for you, and I will talk to you soon. All right, welcome to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. This is Chris, and once again, I'm going to be doing the show solo today from my garage, and I'm really excited to have today's guest. So I have Anthony with me. Anthony, why don't you go ahead and intro yourself and let everyone know a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Probably a little unique to some of your other guests who are, industry folks. Obviously, a lot of the guys that you interview have restaurants or work in restaurants, food trucks, catering businesses, etc. I am probably what I like to consider an obsessed home cook, and forayed a little bit into some pop-up last year with you, and to consider doing some of those going forward. Obviously, delayed currently with some of the plans to do some this year, but certainly have a few on the docket for the summer and fall if things work out. But pretty much a stay-at-home cook is what I call it. I got a full-time job, but I am obsessed with all things food and food related, whether it's fermentation, gardening, baking, pasta making, as you know, is one of my passions. But anything that you can do with your hands and do at home, like I try to get into it. And, it's one of my passions, one of the things that keeps me going.
And I think you're more into it than a lot of professional chefs I know. I'm
That's probably true.
Impressed with all the things you have going, and it seems like you're not doing anything half-assed, go big or go home. And that's why I was super excited. For those who don't know, we did a pop-up this summer, or I guess last summer, fall, together in DC, and it was an Italian themed, kind of focused on homemade pasta, because that's one of the big things you're really into. And that was fun for me because I don't do a lot of pasta. So really having the opportunity to work with you and do that's kind of what Chefs Without Restaurants was all about for me. In some respects, was doing pop-ups, especially with people who could teach me some new things and just have a good time. And the fact that you could totally throw down, someone who's not a professional chef, that you could get in there and cook like any other chef, I thought was so amazing.
Yeah, it was a great marriage for me, especially working with someone who, like yourself, full-time in that space. And obviously, like you said, I'm passionate about homemade pasta and cuisine, Italian cuisine. But I don't have the experience cooking for 10 or 12 people. So I learned a ton from that experience. There's a big difference cooking for a party of 10, 12, 16, whatever it is, and cooking for, my wife and kids at home. And so being able to lean on you for a lot of tips and advice was huge, and kind of transitioning, making pasta for 4, cooking for 10 or 12. And
Yeah, we
I
did
think a lot of
4 pasta courses, I think,
we
right?
did,
So we
yeah.
did 4 separate pastas,
Yep.
all homemade. And what did we have? Like a dozen people, 14 people, something like
Yeah,
that.
12 people.
That's a lot of pasta.
Four pasta, yeah. I think I was up at like 6 a.m. Both Saturday and Sunday morning, cranking out dough and pastas. Obviously, if you're going to do it, like you said, I have a mentality of go big or go home. So I wasn't going to make it week before and freeze it. Wanted it done right, and proper curing and dry time and all of that. So it was fun. I had a great time, and like I said, I look forward to hopefully doing a lot more of those going forward.
How did you get into that? Did you have the cooking bug early on? Is it something you've always been interested in doing?
I mean, coming out of college, I always was interested in food, not necessarily as a career, but just more passionate about, how things are made, right? Like, where do they come from? Like I said, gardening, like, coming from the dirt, growing stuff yourself at home, and then turning it into a meal. Like, so I tend to gravitate towards those types of cuisines, right? So pasta being one, similar. It's like, it's amazing to create such a complex dish from such simple ingredients. If you kind of understand the science, and it's different from baking, where I hate baking, right? Like I don't like following recipes to the T. I prefer feel, right? So one of the biggest things, I think, if people making pasta at home, what are some of the biggest like mistakes that people make, right? One is probably trying to follow a recipe to the T, right? Because it's so much about feel. Like, humidity is different, altitude, like, your kitchen temperature is going to be different, and all that plays into the feel of the dough. How much water you need, how much hydration you need, those types of things. So I've always kind of been drawn towards those types of food cuisines, things that you really need to get involved with your hands, and that have rich culture and background, right? Like, our nonas were making pasta for hundreds of years, and it's still, the same techniques today. Science and technology isn't going to drastically change something like that. I mean, if you're extruding pasta, sure, and that's fine. But I think, being, like I said, a home cook, I really love kind of getting into the nitty gritty details of that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I love Mexican food, and I feel the same way about tortillas. Like, tortillas are
Yeah,
super easy. It's if you're making corn, it's 2 ingredients. It's masa and water, and people all the time
it
ask me,
sounds so easy, right?
it sounds so easy, right? But it's like, are you heating your water? If so, to what temperature? What's your hydration rate? And it's the same thing. It's very much a feel. Like, I can say I weigh my masa and I weigh my water, and this is my ratio. It still might not be the same for you. So you have to have that
Yeah,
intuitive. Like,
and it might not be the same day today as it is next week.
exactly. Did you cover it when it was resting, or did it dry out a little bit? Like, you need to know what that feel is, that like tackiness, right? And pasta's the same way, like that right hydration. And you might
Yeah,
need to just
and that hydration's so different from shape to shape too, right? Like, a lot of the time, like, I'm not going to make a dough and then decide on the shape afterward, because the hydration, the stickiness, the tackiness, like it all plays into that final shape, right? So if you're stuffing or rolling a pasta, then you're probably going to want a little bit more tackiness in your dough in order to, be able to seal it when you're shaping. So it might be the same dough, like, for a stuffed pasta, I'm probably going to use this same similar type of egg ratio dough that I would use for noodles. But the hydration is going to vary a little bit, because for your noodles, you're going to cure them or let them dry out a little bit before you cut them, to retain shape. And for your stuffed pasta, you want a little bit more tackiness, right? So when you're, sealing the edges, and you want that, they call it like single layer, right? So if you think about a rolled stuffed pasta, inside the cheese or whatever the filling is, you have like a single layer of pasta, but on your edges where you're sealing, you've got double layer. So in order to cook at the right time, you've got to seal the double layer to a single layer thickness. And if you don't have the right consistency in your dough, that's going to be troublesome, or it's going to open or pop in the water. But again, it kind of goes back to what you're saying, thinking through what you're making and how all the steps of that process impact the final product.
What do you think is the best pasta that you can make quickly? And I mean this in the context of, I have a lot of customers say,
cavatelli.
I want you to come to my house.
I can teach anybody to make cavatelli. Like, that's just like probably the most simple, straightforward, right? Semolina water. That's it. And you're talking probably like 45% hydration, maybe 47, and the easiest to shape. I mean, you're rolling out a rope. It's very similar to when we made Malloratus, when you were working to pop up with me. Cavatelli, very similar. It's just going to be the thickness that you're rolling the strands out into before you kind of pop them out into individual cavatelli. But semolina water, that's it. You're letting it rest for probably 30, 45 minutes after you need, and then you're ready to roll. And it is, I mean, you can use your thumb to roll them out. You can use a knife blade to roll them out. You can use, like, if you have a pastry cutter, you can use that to roll it out. But you can do it on a flat surface. You can use the back of like a cheese grater to get some texture on it. I've seen you can use like a sushi mat to get kind of some ridges on it. You don't need fancy tools or anything like that, but most definitely the simplest of pasta shapes to get started with.
That's good to know, because people want me to come and make pasta, and sometimes they have a very specific thing they want me to make. And it's like, well, once you think about the mixing time, the resting, the hydration time, and then like when you roll it out, does it need to cure? It just seems like it's a lot more than I can handle in a dinner. Like if I'm going to only be in the house for 4 hours, start to finish, it doesn't seem realistic for me to come and even start right off the bat making pasta that then we're going to eat that night at dinner. Like I don't see that I can fit it into my plan.
I haven't had the experience of working in some of the, in restaurants that are doing homemade pasta. So I can't necessarily speak to how they specifically. I have some friends that own Italian restaurants, and I lean on them for advice, but I know that refrigeration for a certain amount of time is perfectly kind of normal for pasta shapes, especially if you've got egg in the dough or otherwise. But like if you made it in the morning or even the night before for certain shapes, you could keep it in the refrigerator up until service without having a major impact on kind of the texture or feel. I would go, but you don't want to leave it then out, because you want to go straight from the fridge to dropping it in your water, because you don't want to lose shape if you bring it back down to room temperature or anything like that. But certainly doesn't necessarily have to be made a la minute, right? You can do some things in advance with fresh pasta. And you can freeze it too. It's not the worst thing in the world. It's still going to taste good. If I'm only doing pasta dinner every quarter, I might do it, fresh, but certainly, you can try it at home and see freezing and kind of, it'll adjust the cooking time, that type of thing. But certainly there's some options to not having to do everything last minute right up before the dinner.
Yeah, and I normally wouldn't. It's just when people talk about cooking lessons, that's what I get a lot of.
Yeah.
People want cooking lessons. Like, yeah, I totally would rather do it ahead of time and bring it ready to roll at your house. But I did a bridal shower bachelorette party a couple of weeks ago, and the big thing they wanted was to learn how to make pasta. And I just said, like, listen, we're doing like a 5-course dinner. Making pasta is not gonna work. Like for this
that's like a 2-course. That's like a salad and pasta.
Yeah, like having 6 girls learning to make pasta in an Airbnb where I have to schlep all my stuff in, and you want to make it and eat it that night. I just didn't see any way that was going to happen. But I said, I would love to come back maybe to your house sometime, and we can just do like a pasta workshop, like me and you. But
cavatelli is great, and pappardelle is another pretty simple one. Pappardelle or like a tagliatelle, like it's pretty straightforward in terms of a simple egg dough, and you don't need an extruder. You don't need, like, I hate those attachments on the back of the pasta machines that you can feed through the fettuccine and cut it out. There's absolutely no reason not to just use a knife. If you've got the dough, the right consistency, you just measure off how far off your tagliatelle noodle is, your pappardelle, and cut your strips right with a nice sharp knife, and that's pretty straightforward too.
Yeah, you and I talked about that because I got a roller last year on Facebook Marketplace, and I think it had the cutters, and you said don't even bother with the cutters.
Toss those.
roll it out and just cut by hand. So that's what I've been doing. other than pasta, what's your next big thing that you're into? I mean, is it like the fermentation thing or the
Probably
gardening thing?
gardening and butchering, right? So my buddies and I, we typically butcher and break down 2 to 3 pigs at a time, twice a year. And we do a lot of whole meat curing. So, copas, lonzas, lopa, got some prosciuttos hanging for, up to, we'll do 24, 36 months on those. I really prefer like the funkiness that comes with a longer age on those. And so, yeah, that's probably one. And then the other is, like I said, I know you and I share a love for gardening as well. Certainly trying to do a little bit more each year. I learn it's another thing like baking and pasta and all those other things. You learn as you go. Every year, kind of tweak what you're growing and how you're adjusting your soil based on the previous year's results. And I'm probably in year 4 or 5 of being serious into it and planning to kind of really get into a little bit more this year than I have in past years.
And it was last year that you had the deer ravage your garden, right?
Yeah, right. I had my tomato plants that were beautiful. I mean, the yield was incredible. I probably had, 70 to 80 tomatoes on 3 different plants, and the deer didn't touch them. And they grew out of, I have a kind of a little greenhouse cover that's only 4 feet, and the tomatoes were supposed to be, the smaller size, and they just blew up outside of the cover. And so I took it off and just watched them, and the deer didn't touch a single tomato until I swear they went from like almost ripe to ripe. And then like overnight they destroyed like 80% of my tomatoes. So I'm building a little fence this year around it, and I'm going to do probably double or triple the total tomato plant as I did last year.
Yesterday I had my first things pop up. I had 4 things come up. So I think the row 7 cucumbers, 3 plants popped, and that's a Fantastic. 100% germination rate, which is crazy to me. Because
I think I've had almost 100% with all their stuff.
And 2 days, we planted those on Sunday night or mid-afternoon, and by Tuesday morning, those things had popped. But it's a lot of doing it the right way. Like I have a heated seed mat. Yep. I keep it covered with this dome thing. It's got a lot of water in there. I'm using a grow light, so it is creating like an indoor.
What grow light are you using? An LED or a fluorescent?
Yeah, I'm using an LED. I've had it for 5 years or so. I think it's probably something they sell to grow pot.
No, I have an LED too. It's got a pink light, and I always am worried that my neighbors like I can see in my back window.
It's a gigantic spotlight that I have on like one of my workshop tool clip-on clamp lights. So I have this clamp light clamped to the table in my living room, just throwing a ton of light. Like my wife doesn't even want the light on when she's home because the whole house lights up. But that's how you get 100% germination in 2 days. So
yeah, I love their Badger Flame beets too. The roast and the cucumbers last year were probably my best growing plant that I had all year. Were the row 7 cucumbers.
Yeah, the 898 squash grow really well for me. I think last year we had 2 plants, and I pulled probably close to 50 off of that. Mm-hmm. And they hold up really well. I just used my last ones up in like February.
Wow.
Nice. They were growing in the summer. I just put them in the garage and stored them really well.
Yeah.
And they were super hardy. So I got a lot of mileage out of those, which was nice. I'm hoping to have a banner year this year with that stuff. Beets, I think I'm mildly allergic to, at least.
Oh, no.
Yeah, at least in their raw state. I have really bad seasonal allergies and pollens and stuff. And we grew some beets 3 or 4 years ago. And my wife took them and made a raw salad, and I ate them. And I had the worst pain I ever had in my throat. It was like someone kicked me ninja style in the throat.
Wow.
And I did a lot of research, and the general consensus without consulting a doctor is that there's high concentrations of pollens, especially in raw vegetables, beets being one of those, and it's not uncommon. And I've read a lot of things from people who say, that's vegetables only natural defense. Like they're trying to poison you. And this whole raw food movement, like a lot of raw
I was going to say that's how
produce isn't good for you.
I prefer beets raw than I do cooked a lot of the time, sliced thin, especially those Badger Flame ones. The flavor is incredible.
Yeah, so I didn't get any of those. I'm not messing with those beets. Maybe I should for my family, but otherwise everything's a go with me. Yeah,
and then the gardening kind of morphs into some of the other things that I really love getting in right now, like lacto fermentation, pickling, dehydrating and like preserving, like in terms of when you talk about like the home cook, right? Which, a lot of people right now are doing a lot more home cooking than they ever did before. And I think the well-stocked pantry is like the number one go-to for, being able to produce really awesome food at home, right? So being able to preserve those fresh ingredients that, are awesome in the middle of summer through those various, through pickling, through lactive fermentation. I got into dehydrating a lot of stuff last year. Like for our pop, we did the dehydrated the nasturtium leaves and then ground them up into a salt, which was awesome. But there's so many different ways to preserve those those seasonal flavors to be able to kind of tap into throughout the year.
Yeah, my nasturtiums went crazy last year, and I realized we're going on vacation, on Monday, and on Sunday late afternoon, I was like, I'm going to lose all these if I don't do something with them. And like a crazy person, I went out and pulled all my nasturtiums, the flowers, the leaves, and spent the next hour, probably 2 to 3, preserving them, and I took the flowers and I threw them into some gin. I threw them into some vinegar. I ground some into sugars. I took the leaves, same thing, like dried some in bursts in the microwave, ground them up. And I was just doing everything. I threw some in a blender and made like a chimichurri and then threw it in bags and stuck in the freezer because you spend all this time and energy making this stuff. Yeah. Like you can't let it go. But I just hadn't really thought about that. And they'd come up. I'm like, I'm going to lose all this stuff in the week that I'm gone, and just wanted to jump to it. And I still have some of that stuff in my pantry from last year because it's held up really well. The nasturtium flower sugar was really interesting. Just taking the petals and grinding them into white sugar was really interesting because it has that like pepperiness.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that, I mean, you mentioned vinegar, like you have to be able to accept failures too, right? Like you deal with those a lot, obviously, and learn from them. But like I've never had success making vinegar. Everything I've tried has turned out completely terrible. I mean, fortunately, you and I both also share a love for Keep Well and the folks there that do incredible, awesome things. But that's one where I will spend the money to buy the stuff that's that they're doing and move on to something else at home because that's a tough one.
But it's a fun project.
Yeah, I tend to have too many of those going on at once. I've just started a Parmesan garum. So primarily taking like rinds, like a ton of Parmesan rinds with koji and water, and then just letting it go in a slow cooker until you've got like a beautiful, rich, intense Parmesan garum.
You applying for a job at Noma?
No, never. But yeah, projects are all over the place. My wife is very. Sometimes she gives me a hard time, but a lot of the time, she's very forgiving as it comes to this.
Yeah, I just did a pickle brine fried chicken at home the other day, but I was so disappointed because I had this jar and it probably looked like urine, but I had been like combining pickle brines and stuff like that in the fridge, saving up for this. And my wife, every time she opened the fridge, would say, "Are you done with this?" No.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Last week, she must have thrown it away. And I went to go make my fried chicken this week. I was like, "Where's the brine?" Oh, that got thrown out. I'm like, you literally, every time you open the fridge, you ask me, I said, save it. But it was a combination of like pickled jalapeno brine and like dill pickle brine.
Well, at least you combined them. I'll just leave like 6 to 8 like empty brine containers in different sizes in the fridge. But at least I should probably combine them into a single
I probably should have
container or something.
I have 2 fridges in my garage. There's no reason.
Or label it, right? Get some painter's tape on there.
So I didn't have quite the pickle brine fried chicken I wanted. Like I may do, but my in-laws had a jar of like Vlasic kosher dills. So I poured all the brine and then we had a jar of like dry pickles because I just wanted the brine for fried chicken. I'm like, well, we have to eat pickles with dinner because these are not going to hold. So yeah, you have all these little projects going. I know how that is. So what are some of your favorite resources for a home cook, being that you are a home cook and maybe not everyone's going to be as into it as you, but if someone out there, a listener, is looking to get into some cool projects, what are some resources, whether it's books, websites, like where would you point people who wanted to kind of get into some passion projects?
Yeah, well, luckily, I mean, we're in an age now where like resources are not the issue. It's more a matter of, finding what you're passionate about and then getting into locating the right resources for that, right? Because with YouTube, with blogs, with Instagram, even like from a pasta perspective, I've learned more on Instagram than anywhere else, without a doubt. I mean, there's so many incredible pasta chefs that are really engaging on Instagram, where I'll reach out, shoot them a DM, ask them a question about like dough hydration, and they'll get right back to me. Videos where, because it is, we talk about pasta being so much about feel, but when it comes to shaping, like you can't read about shaping in a book, right? Like it's really challenging to kind of try to read through the process of shaping a pasta in words. So being able to tap into resources like Instagram for something like that has been invaluable. But yeah, I mean, I read a ton of books too, obviously, cookbooks, I think more for inspiration than recipes, different ideas that you can, because as a home cook, one of the things that I've learned is like organization and prep and like the ability, the mindset of not trying to do too much, right? Keeping it simple, getting great ingredients and keeping it simple, because we don't have stations like you have in like a Michelin restaurant where like somebody's handling the sauce, somebody's handling the protein, and like you've got to do it all. And so the more complex that you're trying to make a dish by yourself in a short amount of time, the more you're likely to F it up, right? And
yeah, I said the same thing. My whole business, like I came from a place where I had a lot of hands and cooks to literally overnight having no one and doing it off site as well. I've really had to learn editing and being able to get the most bang for my buck on that plate. Like my customers are not looking for something that has 4 sauces on a plate and multiple proteins and all this. Like I've gone back to kind of the protein and 2 sides, or something like a pasta where it's all in one dish. And that's just the way I need to have my food be based on my business model, unless I want to start hiring people. And I think it's come out for the better. I've definitely learned editing. Like you don't need to put that extra thing on. I mean, look at the plates that we put out with just the 2 of us there. We didn't have 15 people. There weren't 4 sets of tweezers going on the plate.
And we barely had enough room to like stand back to back.
Yeah. So imagine doing that dinner by yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, the resources are more than anything, just, circle back to finding out, what you're trying to, if you don't have something in mind, it's just too much information out there almost. So, if it's pasta, you can research, like I said, YouTube, Instagram, whatever it is. But if it's something like pancakes, right? Like, if you, whatever it is that you're into, you can find a lot of really great information out there in a multitude of sources. And I find videos are probably the most helpful, but obviously, reading a lot and kind of digging into why things work helps when you're in the home kitchen, to understand, like, if you don't understand why you're doing something, you don't know how to apply it to something else, right? If you understand like why you're adding this ingredient at this point, or why you're not, like why you're salting the water versus salting the pasta, right? Versus, and understanding the purpose behind it, then you can apply that to other dishes and other cuisines as well.
I think it's challenging when you have conflicting trains of thought. From
find someone you respect,
experts.
Find someone that you have a similar, preference with in terms of like, type of cuisine and flavor profile. And cause like you said, otherwise, it can be really challenging to kind of navigate different opinions and different methodologies.
Yeah. Like I probably have 20 pasta books and they're all different. It's like whether a flour and water book, or you're going with Mark Vetri's book or Jen Lewis's Pasta by Hand, they all have different ways that they approach something. It's like, oh, well, I don't want to say what's the best, but like, where should I start? And you just like take one of those books and work through it and try. And then from there, maybe try one of the other books, and then you can combine once you've kind of got there. It's the kind of
they all probably work, right? It's not that one's right or one's wrong necessarily. Like everyone, you go over to Italy, and it's so regional. Pasta's so incredibly regional. You're not going to find the same pasta made the same way in Bologna that you're going to find in Rome, right? It's just how it's hundreds of years of perfecting a certain way of doing something. And it's
And
not that one's wrong and one's right.
know.
It's just that's just how they've done it. And like you said, it's preference of, growing up eating it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten into pizza too, and I've been working on pizza dough, and like there's a million different styles. Like this might be a perfectly made or a really good Neapolitan, but if you like a different style, then you like a different style. And
yep, no doubt.
You get into all those things. So yeah, pasta is the same with that, but I'm kind of beginning my pasta journey. So who are some of the Instagram pasta people that you would recommend following? I know there's a lot, but if you had a couple for those who maybe don't.
Some of my favorites. So you recently met Paseo David, right? Up in the Philadelphia
Philly Chef Conference.
The Philly Chef Conference, right? Yeah, he's incredible. His stuff is amazing. I love a lot of the resources he's done. He does a lot of videos and things, so he's great. Rob Gentile from Barbuca is fantastic, and his pasteo there is great. Anthony Andiaro, who used to work down at Bianco in Scottsdale, now has his own place in Westchester, Philadelphia, and he's incredible.
Did you know I used to live in Westchester, Pennsylvania?
No.
Yeah, that's before we moved here to Frederick. That's where I lived, and it was before he came there. And now you hear all this about, like, oh, there's this amazing place in Westchester. I'm like, I lived walking distance from there.
Yeah.
I haven't been back to Westchester since we moved in 2007, so it's probably worth a trip up there for that.
Yeah, and Todd Stein's a chef up in Chicago that I'm good friends with, who he's been incredibly helpful to me in terms of like, one-off questions on different doughs and types of pasta shapes. But I can throw out some. We can throw them on the notes in the podcast as well. And
yeah, definitely. I always like to have a good amount of show notes. So I'll link all those up there. I'll put your info, but then also some of these people, and letting everyone know some places where they can at least get a good start.
We talk a lot about shapes. We don't talk a lot about sauces. And, I think about home cooking and how unique and different it is from restaurant cooking. And, we talk about simplicity and how that, is important for home chefs. And I think it stays true with sauces as well. If you think about like, what are some of the biggest mistakes home cooks make when making pasta at home, right? I think sauce is probably up there towards the top, either over saucing or over complicating sauces, right? Like if you're going to go through the effort of making homemade pasta, don't drown it in sauce. Right? Like let the pasta speak for itself. And you can do as simple as like, I love carbonara sauces, and I love like a simple like gricia, which is similar to cacio e pepe but with some guanciale or pancetta added. And then you can do simple butter sauces. Like one of my absolute favorite sauces when it's in season is like cherry tomatoes, just like blistered down in olive oil and garlic, and like throw a little basil once they've popped. And like it is super simple, but it's got elevated flavors from being seasonal that are incredible, married with like a fresh homemade pasta. Similar to we did the sun golds on the pop-up, right? Like it's 2 ingredients, it's sun gold and olive oil, right? Like, I mean, it's all you need, but the way you cook that down when the sun golds burst, it's one of my absolute favorite sauces to use in season based on just the flavor profile and the simplicity. But I think that's something that home chefs need to really consider when they're making pasta at home, not to get too complicated with the sauce. A simple pesto is beautiful. Off heat, don't ever toss your pasta with pesto on the stove. You're going to break up the vibrancy. You're going to kill some of that intense flavor. Always toss off heat in a stainless steel bowl, or just take your pot off the heat. Same with like when you're doing
your pesto. Are you a mortar and pestle?
If I can, that's certainly my preference. I think it has a huge improvement if you do use mortar and pestle. Obviously, being a home cook, you have the time and capability to do that. It's a little bit tougher in restaurants, right? But I think using a mortar and pestle definitely gives a more intense, like, complex flavor profile that once you've tried it, it's hard to go back. Similar with sauces, like in terms of one of the things I hate is seeing a bowl of pasta that goes from the water to the plate and then you put the sauce on top, right? Like there's not much more maddening than that. Using the pasta water and the in the pan to toss your sauce and your pasta and kind of marry the two together, bind them, get all that sauce within in the nooks and crannies and coating on your pasta. Certainly make sure that you're cooking a little al dente on your pasta to to allow some cook time in the pan with the sauce, right? So cook it 80%, cut it down, from when you would normally be ready to eat, and then put it into your pan with your sauce. I don't think home cooks realize how much butter is used in the industry as well, right?
For
So
sure.
I've definitely learned, don't let my wife see how much butter I use.
Salt as well. I think people really
Yeah, butter and
underestimate how
salt,
much
no
salt
question.
things need, especially the salting the water. My wife's the same way with that. Every recipe says salt the water till it tastes like the sea. And my wife, who's a dietitian, looks like she is going to die when she sees the amount of salt that I put in the water when I'm cooking my pasta.
And if you salt to the sea, you kind of have to have more restraint when you're finishing, whether it be with Parmesan, which adds some saltiness, breadcrumbs or otherwise.
Do you dose your cooking water with any semolina? I know that's something I've seen in recipes.
No.
That restaurants are reusing the same water, so you get.
That's probably something that may make sense from a restaurant perspective. I don't think it has any. From a home cook, I don't see any real benefit. I'm not going to reuse my pasta water after.
Meaning that in a restaurant, the water has been reused a number of times, so it has that residual starchiness. So you don't need,
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. At home, this is your first batch of pasta for the night.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily have that starchiness, and that
especially because homemade pasta is cooked so fast, right? So you're not developing. That's interesting. I will play around with it now.
I think that's Thomas,
but I haven't historically.
I think Thomas McNaughton's Flour and Water. I think I saw that in there, and it's I have the book. I'd have to look, but it's maybe 1 or 2 tablespoons of just semolina flour in the water, so that if you're cooking a very quick fresh pasta, adding that water into your sauce, you're not really getting that body because you don't have the starchiness. Just something interesting. I didn't know if you were doing or not.
I'll run the test and let you know.
Awesome. Sharing the knowledge,
That's what it's all about. Absolutely. We've got all kinds of other stuff going on. I got a sourdough started a couple of weeks ago. I started it before the Corona hit, and everyone else bought up all the flour from the store.
I was thinking the same thing. Now seems like the good time to do it, but I can't.
You would think so, but there's no bread flour available.
There's no flour anywhere. I can't find commercial yeast either to make breads and stuff. So I'm down to 2 packets of yeast.
Good luck on pizza making it home. I mean, that's probably one where you do wish you had a starter at this point, because you're not going to get your hands on any active dry yeast.
Yeah, thank God. My buddy, co-host of this show, Andrew from Pizza Llama, is still in business. So I think if I need pizza, I'll just hit up Andrew and say, can I just buy a pizza round off of you and go from there. But all these projects I want to do. I mean, we already did some baking yesterday, and we used one of our packets of yeast. It's like, ooh, I got 2 left. What am I going to want to do? Depending.
Yeah, my daughter really wants to make donuts, and I'm like, that's pretty much I'm out of yeast. So we make yeasted donuts like that, because she likes I like the cake, old fashioned cake style. She likes the yeasted, and that's pretty much our full supply of active dry yeast if we make yeast donuts.
Yeah, someone the other day posted a recipe for an easy focaccia, and it called for 5 cups of flour. I'm like,
I gotta ration that.
As easy and as good as that sounds. Really weird times. When we go back and listen to these podcasts, everyone's gonna be like, wow, that was like the old days. These people talking about rationing. We're weird stuff. Yeah. So I've kind of modified the speed round question. So I guess getting into that, the first question I had on there is, what are some things that you would buy for your pantry? You went to the store 2 weeks ago because you knew you were going to be locked indoors. What are some of the things you bought, or some of the things you wish you bought that, if you're going to be in the house for an extended period of time, things that are shelf stable? So not talking about what you're canning and putting up yourself, but what are some of the things that you wanted to make sure you loaded up into your pantry to have?
Spices, certainly. I'd love, all different kinds of unique spices. We talked about pasta, but my wife and I love Asian foods. We love Mediterranean, Greek food. We love all different kind of ethnic type foods. So having a really well stocked larder of spices, I think it would be critical. I think other than that, like you said, we talked about the need for flour, obviously, being a critical one. Eggs. I go through a ton of eggs. We love, you can use them in baking, you can use them in pasta, you can use, eggs are something that I would absolutely add to the list. What else? I don't know that there's a lot from, the pantry staple side that I don't like a lot of processed food. So if
You
it's
didn't want
not,
to go buy like a ton of dry beans or
oh, dry beans. Yeah, absolutely.
dry
I mean, I
beans.
just ordered like 6 pounds of garbanzo beans
Yeah.
off Amazon to make falafel to have around for, I just made like 2 dozen falafel last week and they're gone in like a couple of days. So yeah, and Rancho Goyo has incredible beans.
His business is booming right now, right?
Yeah, I saw that if you order today, you get it like in, I think May 5th was like your expected
Yeah.
shipping.
I have a bunch of beans because I'm a New Englander, and there's some very specific beans that I can only get up there to do like traditional Boston baked beans and things like that. So when I was up there not too long ago, I brought back a ton of beans. I'm a fan of the yellow eye or the Steuben beans, both of which are like Maine beans. So I have like 10 pounds of those. So I'm going to try a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it'd probably be spices, milk, eggs, and flour, right? You can do pretty much anything with a lot of those. I mean, fortunately, I probably had 30 to 40 pounds of flour before this all happened anyway. And I probably had like 10 pounds of beans already. My wife, I laughed because a friend of ours was like, oh, yeah, we went through, I think we have 9 days worth of dinners. I was like, I'm fairly confident we could go 9 months without going to a store.
Well, we're going to get into some weird, interesting stuff. It's a good opportunity, and I'm hoping my family's down with some organ meat cooking because I got
nice
stuff in here. Hoping to break.
I think I got like 30 pounds of foie in the freezer downstairs too.
Oh no, I'm not fancy like that. Like I got beef heart and some livers in there. So once again, I'm coming to your house. Well, that sounds like you're pretty well stocked there. Do you have a favorite chef? You know, it sounds like there's a lot of people you follow, but is there someone you've always really been interested in?
I mentioned Rob Gentile earlier. I mean, Barbuca's on my bucket list, for sure. In terms of, some of the one of the places that I think is just doing incredible stuff right now. Otherwise, Dan Barber is somebody that I really admire and would love to get to the farm one day to do a meal there. And the things that he's doing in terms of within the restaurant industry, I think are unparalleled and really incredible moving forward as it relates to like sustainability and farming and stuff. So he's probably up there towards the top of the list too.
And I know there's a lot of books, but do you have one or two books that you would recommend people check out, or something that you particularly love?
I love Cooking from Zahav. That's one of my favorite like go-to books.
What's your favorite recipe? Because that's one of my favorites as well.
The burned eggplant, the twice cooked burned eggplant. I love that one. But that's probably the one I cook the most. But in general, I just think everything in there is awesome.
Do you know what's become our favorite? My wife found it. It's the halloumi, date, and apple salad.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I actually have served that to like guests, like customers. We made that at home. And I just loved it. And, for people listening, you puree dates with walnuts, sherry vinegar, and olive oil. And then you put that down on a plate and you take some halloumi cheese, sear it in a pan and olive oil, and then just take like a Granny Smith apple, cut it into matchsticks, put it on top, and some fresh dill with some Urfa Biber or Aleppo pepper. Super easy, packed full of flavor. And that's just one of those things. I think it was the first thing we made out of the book. So we make that at home a lot. And I even take that on the road with me and sometimes serve it at dinner parties.
Yeah, Zahav and 6 Seasons. I mean, 6 Seasons is one of those books where we talked about earlier where like, I don't necessarily read it to follow the recipes, but in terms of like an inspiration of how to use ingredients, it's incredible. And it has a lot of great techniques and tips, And I love the way that it's broken down in like 6 seasons rather than the typical 4, as a lot of awesome techniques and tips on how to use vegetable produce and things like that.
And it has a lot of subcomponents. Like what I find with these books are a recipe will have 5 recipes in it. There'll be like a vegetable technique, a brine, or something. And that's one of those books where I don't think I've made anything completely from it, but I've found interesting techniques or marinades. So
exactly.
Like you, I'm using these books to just go through and say like, oh, you made a whatever dill vinaigrette. That sounds really good. I'm going to try that. And I don't necessarily put it on the fish or whatever.
Exactly how it is in the book,
things.
right?
And that's one of those books I think has a lot no, cool stuff in there.
Yeah. It may have 120 recipes, but you're probably learning 300 different techniques that you can use.
Yeah. No, that's a favorite of mine. And it's so hard because there's so many books.
Oh yeah.
I'm so backlogged. And I'm torn because right now I have the time and I want to go through these books, but I also know I'm not going to have any of the ingredients to make any of the things I want.
Right.
But I'm hoping to go through and like look at some of these things. October came and I probably got 20 new cookbooks and haven't even gotten into them really. So I'm going to take some time, find some recipes, and kind of
just get your notepad out and start
absolutely
jotting down ideas for future menus.
Yep. That's what I plan on doing. So can you recommend a business right now that's still open and kind of either just grinding it out, whether they're doing takeout, carry out, food trucks?
So Pizzeria Inferno is still doing takeout pizzas. Love what they're doing out there. I know they're still open. A lot of the
they're in Gaithersburg, right?
Yeah, exactly. Brockville, Gaithersburg area.
Someone I know said they were there the other night and talked to Tony. Was that you?
No, I saw it though on the Chefs Without Restaurants.
Yeah,
page.
And that he's doing like a better business than before, like selling out faster, which I don't doubt at all.
Yeah, their stuff's amazing. And then just there's a ton of places online that you can still support, like Hayden Mills Flour down in Arizona is one of my favorite flour mills. They're still open with online orders, and so if you're struggling for flour, check them out. I just got an order of like 15 pounds of flour from them the other day, and now that I've got that sourdough going, getting to bread flour and things like that, they're an awesome resource, really worth checking out.
Yeah, that's cool. I think so many of these businesses like Rancho Gordo and Hayden Mills, as people can't find the things in the grocery store that they maybe would be buying, they're going online and hopefully going to find some really great, smaller, family-run businesses that chefs already know of.
Exactly.
Faced with having to buy, flour online, they're maybe going to find a place that they like. So I think that's really cool. I just want to give some love to those people who are still in business because so many of
Keep
us.
Well Vinegar, that's the other one. If you haven't
Vinegar.
ordered from Keep Well, check them out.
Keep Well Vinegar. Yeah, I've got probably 4 bottles of stuff here. I know that doesn't come close to probably what you have, but
I just got an order the other day, and so I probably have 2 cases, like 24 or so bottles of vinegar down in the basement.
Very nice. Cool. Any parting words for the listeners out there?
I mean, look, if you're cooking from home, the biggest thing, the most important thing, it is to have fun. I think that's why I do it. Is I love doing it. I'm really passionate about it. It is something that is a stress reliever. It's something that kind of clears your mind from everything else going on in the world. And I love doing it not because of the pleasure it brings me, but the pleasure it brings other people. And so, cooking with that attitude, it's hard to fail, and being willing to accept those failures and mistakes and learn from them. It's just as important being a home cook as it is in a restaurant.
Yeah, definitely. I agree there. And I'm looking forward to really doing some more cooking at home because I don't get to do that enough. So I'm going to take this time to kind of refocus my energy as a home cook as well. So we're all home cooks right now.
Yeah, and let's lean on each other. If you got any questions, like you said, as it relates to whether it's pasta or otherwise, I'm more than happy to touch base and share some information.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put your info out there and people can get in touch with you. Well, thanks so much. This has been the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. As always, please like, share, subscribe, give us feedback. Let us know what you think. Review. There are just
shoot some reviews. Yeah, let's go.
There are just a handful of reviews out there. Now's the time. You've got the time.
One is mine.
Just come on and say, it's a great show. 5 stars. Yeah, so you can find us everywhere that you listen to podcasts. And obviously, if you're listening to this, I think you knew how to find us. But we're chefswithoutrestaurants.com and .org and on all social media platforms, Chefs Without Restaurants. Have a great week.
Thanks for listening to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. And if you're interested in being a guest on the show or sponsoring a show, please let us know. We can be reached at chefswithoutrestaurants@gmail.com. Thanks so much.